There are several types of glands found in the skin that we're going to discuss here. Just to remind you guys, all of the glands found in the skin are exocrine glands. And remember that that means that the glands are going to secrete through a duct. In this case, pretty much always onto the surface of the skin, but usually it would be into an open area, a lumen, perhaps intestinal or something like that, but it's going to be through a duct onto a surface rather than into the blood. All right? We talked about glands when we were talking about epithelial tissue. So remember that glands are typically made out of epithelial tissue and that they have several forms. They can be tubular, they can be simple tubular branched, they can be coiled tubular, they can be acinar, which means kind of pouch-shaped. They could be simple branched acinar. All of that means that there's no branching in the duct. That's what simple means. Or they can have branched ducts, right? Where the duct itself is branched, and then you have tubular acinar or tubulo-acinar glandular areas. But these are called compound, and that means that the duct itself is branched. Also recall that there are three ways exocrine glands function. There is merocrine secretion. This is where secretion occurs through vesicles that exocytose at the apical side of the cell. There is apocrine secretion. This is where the apical side of the cell, hence apocrine, breaks off. Like it fills with whatever is going to be secreted, and then the top part of the cell breaks off, and then it dissolves into a bunch of different pieces. That's apocrine secretion. Last, there's holocrine secretion. This is where you have one cell. It divides into two cells, and then the top cell totally dissolves. And then the bottom cell divides again. This is holocrine secretion because the whole top cell is coming apart. There are 5 types of glands in the skin. Merocrine sweat glands, apocrine sweat glands, sebaceous glands, Ceruminous glands, or Ceruminous glands, and Mammary Glands. So first off, sweat glands. There are 2 types of sweat glands found in the skin, apocrine and merocrine. And to make things just totally confusing, they both work through a merocrine method. We used to think that apocrine sweat glands worked through an apocrine method, that they broke apart the apical portion of the cell, and that fell apart, and then they grew a new apical portion of the cell. It has since been discovered that apocrine sweat glands actually work through a merocrine methodology. They just make vesicles, and then they secrete those vesicles through exocytosis, the same way merocrine sweat glands do. However, the name has stuck. So even though it's called an apocrine sweat gland, remember that it actually doesn't work through an apocrine methodology. Merocrine or ecrine sweat glands, these ones are found all over the skin. So we're starting off here. These are found all over the skin. They are simple tubular glands, and they're coiled. So they coil back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. They are found everywhere, and they secrete normal sweat onto the surface of the skin through pores. They are particularly dense on the palms, soles, and forehead. Right? Those are where you're going to sweat most voluminously through Mammary Glands, and their function is to produce perspiration that cools the body. They're your main cooling gland. Apocrine sweat glands, on the other hand, these are not usually found active until puberty, and they are located in areas that are of sexual significance. They are found in areas that start to grow dense, dark hair upon puberty in both men and women. So they are found in the groin, in the anal region, that's on the butt, right? The axilla, which is your armpits. The areola, which is the region around your nipple, so your nippular region. In men, on the bearded area. And again, these are inactive until puberty, and these, while they do create sweat, what they create is a sort of milky, thick sweat that isn't just salt water that's going to evaporate. It contains a high amount of proteins and fatty acids. They are simple tubular glands that are coiled, very similar to Mammary glands in their structure, but instead of leading, of squeezing their sweat through pores onto the skin, they have ducts that lead into hair follicles. So remember, they're found in hairy regions. And these hair follicles are where the sweat is going to come out of. These glands particularly respond to stress and sexual stimulation. They're believed, although we don't have proof, but they're believed to secrete pheromones, subtle chemicals that can be smelled and that can influence behavior of the opposite sex. There's been some evidence that, for instance, by smelling a pad that was placed underneath the armpits of somebody who was going through some emotional situation, somebody else who was unaware of what that emotional situation was had a better than normal, a better than average, or a better than expected ability to guess what it was. So they could sense, oh, this person was experiencing fear. And particularly when you're talking about females, it tends to secrete more of these pheromones during ovulation, and fewer of them during menstruation. So it's thought that they are also a signal of fertility. These apocrine sweat glands, they are the sweat glands that produce stinky body odor, BO, right? This is called bromohydrosis. This is some of these fatty acids and proteins that are produced in this sweat. They themselves don't stink, but bacteria on the skin metabolize them and produce a substance that does stink. So it's not all sweat that produces BO. Most sweat does not produce BO. It's sweat that comes from these regions: the groin, armpit, areolar, beard, those sorts of things. All of these sweat glands basically exude sweat into the bulb and duct of the gland, and then so you build up a reservoir of sweat in that area, and when you need it, myoepithelial cells contract and squeeze the sweat up onto the skin. These myoepithelial cells are stimulated by the sympathetic nervous system, and remember that the sympathetic nervous system controls the 4 F's: fear, fight, flight, and sex. So those are the circumstances under which you are most likely to produce significant amounts of sweat. These are found in both apocrine and ecrine glands, although ecrine glands are also particularly also produce increased amounts of sweat in response to heat. Your apocrine glands are more going to produce it in response to sympathetic nervous signals. That's anytime you're stimulated, right? You're exercising, you're fighting, you're running away, you are aroused. So those were our first two types of glands, both sweat glands. Next we have sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands are oil glands. These are short flask-shaped glands, and they join into a hair follicle. So they secrete their sebum, which is an oily substance, into the hair follicle, and from there it gets onto the surface of the skin. These are holocrine-style secreting cells, and they are found only on hairy skin. So they're going to be found on thin skin, but not on the soles of your feet and the palm of your hands. This oil has several functions. It keeps the skin moisturized, keeps the skin from becoming dry and brittle and cracked. Most importantly, it makes the skin more waterproof. So it stops water from inside your body from getting out, which is good because you would dehydrate and die. And it stops water from outside the body from getting in, which is also good because that water may contain toxins or pathogens or something like that. You want to keep the water inside your body in and the water outside your body out. This helps with that. Well, humans and pretty much all mammals have sebaceous glands. They are modified in some creatures, so if you've ever seen like raw sheep wool, their wool starts out coated in this like oily, grimy coating called lanolin. That comes from the sheep sebaceous gland. Ceruminous glands. These are simple, coiled, tubular glands that are found in your ear canal. So they're only found in your ear canal, and these are the glands that make earwax. The technical term for earwax is cerumen. The function of cerumen, it keeps your eardrums pliable so that they can vibrate without tearing. It waterproofs the canal to prevent water from getting in and infecting your ears. It is bactericidal, so it's chock full of antibodies and other things that kill bacteria. It's very acidic. By the way, the oil on your skin is also an acidic oil, and it has a tendency to kill off bacteria because acids kill bacteria. And it also makes your ear hairs sticky. Making your ear hairs sticky blocks dust particles, foreign particles from getting into your ear. It's a part of your defense mechanism to prevent bacteria and other things from getting into the deeper parts of your ear where they can do damage. Mammary glands. So mammary glands are our last type of gland. These are found in the in the breast region, particularly of females. Although actually males have mammary glands as well, but in males the mammary glands never really activate during puberty. So they usually don't produce milk, but under certain circumstances they can. So men who've had testicular cancer and don't produce sufficient amounts of testosterone, their mammary glands can actually start developing and producing milk. Men who are extremely overweight The fat buildup in that region can stimulate the mammary glands to produce milk. So it's actually possible for mint to lactate under certain circumstances. It's weird and awkward, but it can happen. These glands usually only produce milk during pregnancy and lactation. Post-pregnancy, they're stimulated by a hormone called prolactin by prolactin and oxytocin that stimulate milk letdown and milk secretion. These are modified apocrine sweat glands, and these ones, my understanding is, actually do produce milk through an apocrine method. So they actually do break off the apical portion of their cells, and it dissolves into, well, milk. So this is, the milk is, of course, going to be rich in proteins and fats. You have, in most mammals, 2 rows of mammary glands going down the left and right portion of the thorax. In primates, we only have 2 glands, a left and a right one typically. But there are a few people who have additional nipples down that line that have kind of reactivated, and this is called polythelia. So to recap, there are 5 types of glands. You need to know what those glands are and what their function is. You need to know the 2 types of sweat glands and how they have a different function and where you're going to find them. You need to know the protective and regulatory functions of the glands, particularly the protective functions of the sebaceous and ceruminous glands, the regulatory function of the sweat glands in terms of regulating body heat, and you need to know the type of secretion for each of the glands.